Professor Ruud Frambach from VU University and author of Marketing at the Top. Do people trust marketing?
Well, there's been a recent study about the trust in different professional areas done by GfK, a Dutch market research agency. And unfortunately, many people do not trust marketers. So they found that only 32% in Holland last year, 2011 actually, trust marketing specialists. And that's, of course, relatively low.
Yes. What is the role of a CMO?
A CMO in company, of course, is responsible for the marketing area of the firm. And of course, therefore, many CMOs should be responsible for the way in which also marketers are seen, both in the company and outside of the company. The CMO is responsible for making marketing an important function in the organization. And if you think of, okay, what should a CMO ideally do? Ideally, the CMO should kind of be a conductor of all activities that are relevant from a marketing perspective. And the CMO has to kind of conduct an orchestra, if you use that metaphor, of people inside the organization, but also external to the organization, to create value for customers. And the central focus of customer values, value creation, and of putting the customer first, that should be the main goal of the CMO. And all his or her activities should be geared and should be propagating that customer value creation in the organization. So therefore, a CMO in the firm should start working together with other people, with finance people, production people, research and development people, to together see, okay, what kind of value do we need to create, and to find optimal ways to create that customer value. Increasingly, we also see that that does not only relate to internal cooperation, but also to external cooperation. Looking at the role of customers, for example. What role do customers play in creating value, or maybe other stakeholders?
Mm-hmm. CMO is a relatively young position. It's not very. There are not very many positions in the top of the company for CMOs. Is there a role for a CMO, and what would the future of it look like?
Yeah, it's true. Not many companies do have the explicit position of Chief Marketing Officer. Some have a similar position. They call that, for example, Chief Customer Officer or something likewise. But not many companies have that explicit position. I think it is important that a company explicitly thinks about, do we focus sufficiently on the customer? Is the customer central to what we do? Is the customer central to our thinking, to our activities, to our behavior? Do we measure how well we perform in the eyes of the customer? If the CEO is able to take care of that, to take on that role, fine. However, what we increasingly see is that understanding the customer, understanding what's going on with respect to your value creation to your customer and to your market is very complex. There's a lot of data, a lot of things happening. Things change also rapidly. It's a very dynamic market. So if you don't have a dedicated area responsible for that, you will face the danger that the company doesn't address it, that it's not important enough in the company. So therefore, I think some responsibility for marketing in an organization is indeed important. And whether it's a CMO or Chief Customer Officer or how you call it, I find that a bit less interesting. What I do find very important is that the focus on the customer and an advocate for the customer in the firm is present. And I think a firm should realize, okay, to what extent do we do that? Do we have that? And if not, how can we correct that?
The effectiveness of a CMO is hard to determine. How can, in the future, CMOs make a position for themselves and show the world that they have a valuable role?
Yeah, the effectiveness of a CMO, of course, largely depends on the effectiveness of the activities that is under the responsibility of the CMO. What we see is that understanding the effectiveness of the activities related to customers, related to marketing, increasingly becomes a focus of many companies in trying to understand how can we measure effectiveness and how can we use the outcomes of these measures in order to see, okay, what things do we do right, what things should we change. I think basically importantly what a company should do is from their choice of what kind of customer value do we want to offer, they have to think about in which ways can we measure to what extent we are doing a good job in creating that value for the customers that we choose to serve. Of course, there are very traditional marketing metrics that you can use, and in marketing and in companies, they've used measures related to how strong is my brand, for example, brand awareness, brand knowledge, how loyal are my customers. But increasingly we see that really understanding what effects marketing activities have on customers in terms of, for example, loyalty is not sufficient, but also taking it one step further, can we really understand how much we are investing in our customers and what kind of return do we get from our customers? And that's kind of a metric what we call customer lifetime value, where you look at what kind of cash flow or profit or contribution do I get from individual customers relative to the investment that I make in individual customers. And if you take that perspective, you get a much better insight into your return on your marketing investment. And that's, I think, a very different view on effectiveness of marketing than maybe in the past, where I would have a marketing budget and I allocate that budget maybe to advertising, but then really don't know exactly what kind of effect my advertising has. Yeah, maybe in terms of my brand awareness and my brand knowledge, but does it lead to higher profitability? Will it lead to maybe higher firm value for my investors in the future? That's very difficult to assess. If you look more in terms of how profitable my customers are, you can also manage not only your customer portfolio, but you can also see, okay, which kind of activities can I do to specific target groups of customers that are most effective? Because maybe some customers react differently to your marketing activities than other customers. And advertising, for example, may be very profitable to a certain customer group, but not to another customer group at all, because maybe there you should use other means. Understanding that, I think, is very important to understand marketing effectiveness. So if you then relate it back to the CMO, when is a CMO effective? Well, I think you can relate it back basically to what extent can the CMO show how effective the marketing activities are that are under the responsibility of that CMO. And we know from research that companies who are able to show better the effectiveness of their marketing activities also perform better and also are more respected by CEOs, chief executive officers, the marketers, that is.
So in short, that means customer equity is the new focus of marketing in the future. That's what you should focus on.
Yeah, I think customer equity is taking an increasingly central role in marketing, and customer equity is being considered as a very important focus for marketing, and it's also been shown recently that improving customer equity also indeed improves shareholder value. In the past, of course, the focus was very much also because of chief financial officers' focus on shareholder value, and CEOs also, of course, look very much at shareholder value because of the investors. If we now know, and we do, that customer equity indeed enhances shareholder value, the focus on customer equity becomes more important. That could be a way for marketers also to see their importance increased, because the marketers, they know how to increase customer equity, because that relates to activities that marketers have been doing always and know a lot about.
That will also add value to the marketeers themselves. Your book is called Marketing at the Top. Can you describe in a couple of sentences what your book is about?
Yeah, correct. So in the book we identify several problem areas that we identify that inhibits marketing to really play a role at the top level of firms, and to really play a successful role in getting the customer on the agenda of the company and getting the focus on value for customers by the company. If that lacks, the company is maybe focused on sales, but not on really the customer's best interest. So what we do in the book is based on the problems that we identify that inhibits that focus, we try to also come up with solutions. What kind of solutions can a company employ to really overcome these barriers? What kind of focus should the company have? What kind of behavior should the company show? And what kind of metrics, for example, should the company measure and follow in order to make marketing more relevant to the company and therefore more effective?
It may be hard for marketeers to convince their CEOs or otherwise head of their department that their skills are necessary to bring the company to the next level. How do you suggest they give the company the next input and take things into their own hands?
I think for marketers it is very important to understand their current role and to see in which ways their current role is effective for the company and also in which ways it is not. I think that's the basis for maybe improving their role and getting more in the picture of the chief executive officer. Basically, if you look at marketers, often, and that's maybe a dilemma that CEOs often also attribute to marketing, that they say, okay, marketers are maybe creative people, but don't know a lot about how they can contribute to value of the firm. Or you see in other companies that marketers are maybe more like scientists, but are not very creative. So maybe you should have both. Marketing that helps to innovate, make the company creative, basically come up with creative solutions to offer value to customers, but at the same time also have a quite scientific approach in the sense that they really understand, okay, if we do that, how effective are we in doing so? So I think basically marketing should be both, science and art.
Are there any companies that embrace the new way of marketing that will make them excel into the future?
Yeah, I think there are excellent examples of companies, both in the past as well in the present, that went through this transition. If I start a bit longer ago, IBM, the big hardware computer company, made an enormous transition to become very customer focused, transforming from a hardware organization to more a service oriented organization and developing software and providing services. Here in Holland, Philips, I think, is an excellent example of a company who also is making that transition, or largely already has made that transition. In the past, very much focused on technology, research and development, basically offering anything that they could make, towards more learning customers, understanding customers, and based on customer insights, come up with solutions that are valued by customers. And now also making the transition towards understanding how effectively are we in doing so. Companies like Apple, of course, have been very successful in both driving markets with new design, new technology, new ideas, but at the same time listening and observing customers very closely and see how their products are received and understanding what is effective and what is less effective and following up on that.
So in short, we're entering a new era and you better adapt or there's no future for you.
Well, I think it's very important to adapt, and I think marketing is in an exciting, it's an exciting time for marketing, and marketing is experiencing exciting changes. And I think companies who embrace those changes and see what it means for them and try to kind of pick out the way, understand the way in which they can best deal with this, and are at the forefront of doing so, that they will also be the ones who are most successful in the market, because I think increasingly with very fierce competition, it's either doing that or being a very me too type of company, but that is not a very good recipe for sustained competitive advantage.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.